Okay, so today we're going to look at one of those weird lenses, a cap lens. That's a Keks lens. It's 30mm f10 lens, focus-free, meant for Leica M mount. So the interesting part is Keks makes basically the plastic. It's good quality plastic, but the plastic cap in which is precisely mounted a Kodak lens. If I understood well, those lenses were meant for those reusable, but those really cheap cameras at one time. So it's focus free. But the interesting part is with this M mount, you can actually adapt it to your modern M camera. So that's an SL2 with a M2L adapter. So just to show you, you can adapt it to kind of any camera, and it makes for a really compact size. And it's pretty cheap, and it's way better, obviously, than a simple cap if you want to unmount another kind of lens. So really interesting, quite creative, and for that we're going to see. Not much more I can say about this. Let's go see a few examples. The Keks Kodak 30mm f10 is really an interesting, as we can see on those two first shots, it's interesting as it brings back the feel of those 1980s, 1990s single-use or sort of multiple-use cameras, film cameras. I do feel that we get the textures and the grain, not the grain, but the color rendering of those lenses. But really good geometry. I was quite surprised at first. And as we can see with those two pictures, the definition is not incredible in the middle, and we lose a lot in the periphery. But it works pretty well. Vintage look to it. We can see on this portrait rotated picture that besides a quite strong vignetting in the sides and some color distortion, the overall scene works well. I didn't correct the geometry, so as you can see also here, the horizontal lines and vertical lines are really well maintained, and the overall color rendering works great. Lots of character, obviously. It's not the lab straight rendering of a higher grade 30mm lens, but that's not the goal and not the price too. One important thing I've talked about in previous episodes on cap lenses is with those cap lenses, it seems that the light rays really get on the sensor if you're working with digital cameras. They get on the sensor with really strong angles, and the thickness of the sensor actually creates some, and the Bayerian filter, I believe, creates some color distortion on the periphery. As we can see on the picture on the left, that's a Leica M240 camera without the micro area of prisms to compensate for it. You get this sort of cyane color distortion, which you won't get on the picture on the right, which is with the SL2 that has this. That's one of the particularities of those Leica cameras. They have those micro prism arrays on top of the sensor to compensate for those strong angles. That's a problem you shouldn't have with film photography because the film is really thin. So just to let you know, that could be a culprit when you're using those cap lenses on some older bodies or bodies which don't have a compensation for this effect. Here again, those pictures, because of the color distortion on top and bottom, as you can see there on this Leica M240 camera. But I thought the picture on the left was a good example of the maximum amount of flare. It's pretty flare resistant, but the maximum amount of flare you can get sometimes with, for example, here having the sun really hit hard at an angle on the lens. But yeah, it kind of reflects also the single lens construction, optical design. And on the right, not very interesting picture, apart from the fact I thought it gives a good indication of how it reacts to geometrical patterns and the color rendering. Those two next pictures I think are also interesting. As usual, I go from the lighter examples I have, usually daylight or strong lit environments, to lower lights. Here we're slowly getting in lower lights, and besides the fact that, again, here I think we see how well this lens manages geometry. you really see the vignetting and the color transformation in the periphery, how it's really not linear, but it gives a strong character to this lens. And yeah, two pretty explicit examples in my opinion. And going to lower lights on the left, again an example of what kind of feel you can get with this really cheap compact lens. I don't think you can really make more compact besides the pinhole lens, but yeah, definitely not the same rendering as the pinhole. Same thing on the picture on the right, and then going to really lower light situations with artificial lighting. The picture on the left gives a good idea of how this lens reacts to close-up objects situations with this 30mm. Pretty good control of the perspectives. And on the right, again, a high contrast situation in very low light. How it manages the textures, and yeah, very creative lens for what it is. And never forget also that it's a really, here's a picture on the left is with the SL2, that it's a very sensitive sensor, but still I had to use a really long exposure, as you can see with the motion blur on the clouds, but it works. And on the right, even with an older sensor which doesn't have that much sensitivity, because it's 30mm, it's pretty resistant to small, slight moves. I mean, not moves, but if you're trembling a little bit, even with slower exposition, you will get something interesting with this lens. So yeah, probably a good investment if you want to replace usual plastic caps by something useful and have in your bag, besides your usual lenses, something creative and actually useful. Yeah, recommended. It's quite a weird thing to look at when you see those kind of lenses and focus free in a time where cameras are increasingly modern and the quality is better and better. It's interesting to have that kind of tool. It's super compact, it's cheap, it's an alternative to having a 30mm. It's obviously kind of how would I say, better than a normal cap if you have to protect your camera and have something on it. And yeah, it was sent to me in this small packaging. And yeah, I would recommend it, like all of those cap lenses. Very interesting creatively and very practical actually.